Welcome to the show.
What show is that?
Welcome to the show.
I'm trying to connect now.
Unable to connect. If you have an internet connection, go fuck yourself, because it doesn't matter.
Okay, salvete discipulia discipuli. It's me again, Miles Crisp, with the 7th episode of Divergent History. It's Friday, May 17th, 2013, and I'm gonna sort of start this with a slight homage to James Burke with his style of connections. So I was talking with a friend of mine the other day about there's a U.S. Navy warship, an aircraft carrier, called the USS George Herbert Walker Bush. That's George Bush, the older one, the one that was president from 88 to 92. Anyway, I was wondering, how are you going to name something after somebody if they're not dead yet? Isn't there like a rule against that? And friend I was asking said, I don't know the rules with that. And I said, yeah, it must not be like coins, because the last person to put their face on a coin before they died was Julius Caesar, and we all know what happened to him. So getting back to Julius Caesar here, he was the first Roman to have anything to do with what the Romans called Britannia. I'm going to pronounce it interchangeably. Basically, I'm talking about the whole big island, England, Wales, Scotland, not Ireland. And he went over there as he was invading Gaul. We all know, or you might be familiar that Caesar spent 7 years taking over what's now basically France and Belgium and the northern part of Italy. As he was doing that, in 55-54 BC, Caesar came over with his 5 legions onto the island of Britain. He failed twice just trying to get across the English Channel, once losing almost all of his ships. When he finally got over there, he managed to secure a minor trade agreement in the year 54 BC. The whole I came, I saw, I conquered is just propaganda. It wasn't until after the assassination of Caligula and the appointment by the Praetorian Guard of Claudius as emperor that the Romans seriously considered invading Britannia. Now, Caesar in 55 BC, when he was up there, saw men with blue paint on their skins from the region of southeastern England, basically. This was apparently made by mixing woad leaves, W-O-A-D, kind of like toad with a W, woad leaves and ammonia, which back then would have almost certainly have been urine, boiling it down and pouring off the water and plant debris. This produced a blue pigment that settled at the bottom of the pot, and that could be added to some sort of spreading medium like fat, semen, blood, wax, or lightly colored clays perhaps, and then applied to the body. The legend is that this would give the warriors a supernatural invisibility. In reality, considering the weather of England, it did help to greatly reduce their reflection in foggy, sodden conditions. So, 100 years after that, the Romans seriously, with Claudius, the Romans seriously tried to invade. And here I'm going to start out with a cast of characters, because this story is going to sort of sound a little bit like a soap opera. But it starts with the Romans led by a man named Plautius. You've got the Emperor Claudius with a C, and you've got the General Plautius with a P like Peter. And Plautius was the governor in general from 43 to 47 AD. Like I said, this is about 100 years after Caesar. Later, Plautius was replaced by a governor named Scapula. He reigned from about 48 to 51 AD. You have the Iceni people, I-C-E-N-I. They're basically from what's now present-day Norfolk. Boudicca's people were the Iceni. Then you have the Trinovantes. They're basically from Suffolk, south of the Iceni. The capital there was Colchester, and at the time, in Latin, it would have been known to the Romans as Cumulodunum. The Romans made this their capital when they first invaded. Then you have the Brigantes. with that annoying ES ending pronounced E's, the Brigantes. They were north and west of the Iceni, so they're north and west of Norfolk. Basically, they're in what's now Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, and Leicester. And I'm not sure if you guys pronounce it Lincolnshire or Lincolnshire. Let me know. I don't know. Anyway, the queen of the Brigantes was named Cardamandua. And Cardamandua becomes a big player in this. Her husband was named Venusius. He wasn't a king. He was just the queen's husband. She was in charge. Then you have the thoroughly unpronounceable Cadovulani, or it's Catuvellani, Cadovulani. They're essentially from what's now Essex and Greater London. They were the tribe along and north of the Thames, south of the Travantes and the Iceni. Caradicus was the king of the Cadovulani. He led the biggest fight against the Romans to that point. This is all before Boudica, by the way. I'm going to get to Boudica eventually, but I'm doing it chronologically. So here begins the story of the first wave of invasion in the island of Britain by the Romans. In 41 AD, Caligula was acting so insane that even his elite personal guard decided that he needed to die. Eventually they made their move when he came back from the palace from some banquet or something like that. They closed all of the doors, cornered him, and stabbed him about 30 times. You know, Julius Caesar style. He's reported by Suetonius, who wrote the book The 12 Caesars, to have said, as he lay in a pool of his own blood, "I'm still alive!" as he lay bleeding on the floor, of course. Then they stabbed him another 30 times, and that finally killed him. After this, the guards noticed his nephew, Claudius, cowering behind a curtain in this room. He had always had a bit of a lisp and a stutter, and nobody in the family or government or politics took him very seriously. The Praetorian Guard proclaimed him to be the new emperor. He needed to secure himself some sort of respect, and invading Britannia would do just that. So, after Caligula is killed, Claudius becomes emperor, and Claudius, just to try to prove himself, decides, hey, I'm going to try to take over Britain. In the year 43 AD, he ordered a general named Plautius to set up a beachhead. He sent in 4 legions, which was about 40,000 men. Each legion is roughly 5 to 10 to 20,000 men, depending. At this time, they were about 10,000 men each. He did this and stopped when he reached what's now London. At the time, it was essentially the lands along the lower Thames where the Cadovulani tribe lived. Caradicus lost this first battle with the Romans, and then he fled west into Wales, or quite near Wales. I'm not sure if he actually went all the way into Wales, but he basically got the hell out of Dodge for a while after he lost the battle. At this point, because of the politics and propaganda, Plautius stops to wait for the emperor to arrive. Claudius basically told him to secure an area, a beachhead, and enough hinterland in order to operate, and then let him come in so that they could do something else after that, and it would kind of look like he actually had something to do with it, so he can go back to Rome and stand in front of the Senate and the people and say, ooh, look at me. You know, it's not unlike a president or a prime minister going out to where the troops are stationed to, you know, say hello, that sort of thing, even though they're nowhere near risk or battle where the front lines are. And Claudius attempts to get there by ship, but it's nearly lost at sea. He ends up landing in Spain and rides overland through Gaul to the town of Gassuriacum, present-day Boulogne. When he gets there, he brings elephants just to show off. So he brings elephants into Britain and with his entourage in full style. He's only there for 16 days. He secures a few trade agreements and peace negotiations with some of the local tribes, and then he goes back to Rome. The whole time he was gone was no more than 6 months. But this was enough this was enough to help his political standing back at home. I guess it's really not that hard to be liked by the people compared to Caligula, for God's sake, but anyway. It had no impact on Plautius' work, but many neighboring tribes opted to collaborate with the Romans after seeing this show of force, rather than being destroyed. One of these such collaborators was the queen of the Brigantes, Cartimandua. And remember, the Brigantines are the ones that are pretty much the furthest north of this area of the south half of England that we're talking about here. And they acted as a buffer state between tribes further north in northern England and southern Scotland that would have been a threat to the Romans, obviously. And her husband, Venusius, hates this whole going along with the Romans thing, and he's constantly petitioning that they start fighting the Romans and stop essentially acting as vassal kings or subject kings. But at the time, in Cartimandua's defense, she didn't really have any other option. She had about 20,000 men marching on her kingdom with a fully disciplined army that she couldn't have done anything about, and they would have killed everybody, or she could accept them coming in, take their money, and pay some taxes in the form of, her people's food and crops, and still stay in power. Anyway, think of her what you want. In 45 AD, Plautius sends 3 waves of armies, south, west, and north. The 9th Legion goes north. That's the one that goes up to Cartimandua's kingdom. They were an important buffer for the Romans, and I already said that part. I'm reading my notes. By 47 AD, the Roman province of Britannia, essentially southeastern England, had been established, and the tribes north of the Thames basically were subject peoples. They weren't directly ruled by the Romans. These tribes included the Trevantines, the Iceni, and the Brigantes, and the Cadovillani basically had just been conquered, and that was complete Roman-held territory after about 47 AD. While this was all going on, Caradicus was off in the Midlands and the southwest, raising as much of an army as he could to harass the Romans. Caradicus attacks pro-Roman villages that had, accepted to get along with the Romans. Well, he went and killed those people. Plautius is recalled to Rome after 4 years in the year 47 BC. It wasn't because he did anything wrong. It was just a habit of Romans to cycle their generals, because you don't want the men getting too attached to a particular general and start to think maybe he'd make a good emperor. So they sent in a man named Scapula, and he chases Caradicus around, generally kicking his ass, but Caradicus isn't stupid enough to engage him in an open battle, and he always melts into the woods and runs off into the hills, and then a week later, the next thing, they're ambushing the Romans again. And Caradicus eventually is forced to flee to Wales. Scapula calls in the 9th Legion out of Lincoln, which was the Brigantes' land, to help him in Wales. Caradicus is never found because he's hiding in fucking Wales. Rebellions are said to flourish in Wales because it's so damn hard to get armies in there. Scapula just burns villages and hunts Caradicus' rebels. Now, as this is all going on, because it seemed like the perfect time to attack the Romans when their back was essentially turned, when they're off in Wales, over in East England, they thought, oh, maybe we could have a second revolt, and that'll really screw them. So the Brigantes plot to overthrow their own queen, Cartimandua. Then Queen Cartimandua discovers the plot to overthrow her, and the reason she figured it out is because she had spies everywhere, and her husband's manservant was one of her spies, and he reported to her all of this plot. She called on the new Roman governor and general, Scapula, to save her, because as per their agreement, she's getting along with them, and in exchange, if anybody attacks her and she calls upon the Romans are supposed to come in like the cavalry and save the day. But at this time, Scapula's over in Wales chasing Caradicus around. And even though he could have eventually have defeated Caradicus, so the historians say, he is held up in Wales after all, he was forced to withdraw from Wales and goes back to the Midlands area to save her. Caradicus was then free to raise as many men as he could, and this bolstered the morale of the rebels because it seemed like he had chased Scapula he had chased the Romans out of Wales, and the numbers of his army swelled. He also decided to attack the Romans more or less directly at this point. He chose his spot in advance, built defenses, and thought he might actually be able to win. He didn't. In the 6th year of the invasion, in 49 AD, Scapula crushes the plot/revolt in Cartamandua's kingdom. I guess back in what's now Lincoln. Then he doubles his men by calling on the 20th Legion out of Colchester, which again was the main Roman capital at the time. And he calls the 20th Legion with him into Wales, where Caradicus is digging in. The next year, in 50 AD, he attacks Caradicus in Wales with the 9th and 20th Legions. Caradicus' own wife and children are taken as slaves as he's defeated in this battle. He's not killed, survives the battle, and ends up fleeing back to the Brigantes area. He probably fled not to Cartamandua, but to Venutius, her husband. She sells him out to the Romans as they're eating dinner that night to secure her position with the Romans, and this thoroughly disgusts her husband, Venutius. Caradicus was sent to Rome in the following year in 51 AD and brought before the Emperor Claudius publicly. And this is what we're told. I don't know if it's true, but apparently he gives this great speech about fighting for freedom and fatherland and stuff like that, and apparently asks for clemency from the emperor, and receives it. The idea for the Romans is that you're so superior and powerful, showing mercy is a way, in their eyes, of acting superior to other people. And he spends out the rest of his retirement, quote, retirement, in a villa somewhere near the city of Rome, although he wasn't allowed to leave. So, as Garrett Fagan said in one documentary I saw, sort of like a golden cage. Are there any questions yet? Anybody?
Not yet, Miles, but this show to me is fantastic. Like, the amount of information is brilliant. I'm just having a research of the places he named to get the geography in my head.
Yeah.
Nerisse had a question. She said, which part of Wales? You mentioned Wales.
I have no idea. I just know that it wouldn't have been Anglesey. I know that much. It would have been closer east than that. Probably. What?
I've just got an interest, Miles, in with Wales and Scotland. What parts? It's probably a really geeky anal interest in which parts of them were invaded by what peoples, and because I've read different accounts with like the Romans and the Vikings too, and whether it is true that some parts of them did kind of stay pure, as it were, non-invaded.
Well, in this first wave of invasion, they didn't even touch Wales. When Caradicus ran off to Wales, it was completely out of anywhere the Romans even attempted to invade. That didn't come until after about 60 AD, and that begins the Boudica story with Suetonius. The first thing he tried to do was go into, apparently it's an island. I didn't even realize this was an island. It's separated by a river. The Isle of Anglesey?
Anglesey, yeah.
Anglesey.
Yeah.
The Isle of Anglesey and stuff. don't quote me on fact on this, but I've heard it was a main druidic learning centre, same as like Oxford and Cambridge and stuff, quite an important place.
It must have been something like that, because that was where they had their last stand with the Romans. The Druids, that is.
Yeah.
They all gathered on that island, and essentially they were all praying, and they had fires lit, and they were doing some sort of ceremonies and things like that. The Romans were on the other side of the river. The river was thought of as sacred in the native British folklore and mythology and religion and spiritualism. So they saw that as sort of like a protective barrier. It was ankle deep. The Romans walked across it and proceeded to slaughter everybody and used the fires that they set for their rituals to burn the island down.
Yeah, well, that got to be a big morale downer, hadn't it, really?
Yeah. Yeah, the Romans, the goal of the Romans when they came into a province anywhere in the world, the idea was after a certain amount of time, the army will not have to be there in order to keep people from wanting to revolt.
Miles,
Yes.
there's certain times of the year, because it's not a river that separates Anglesey from Wales. It's the sea. It's a tidal estuary. Some of the worst, most difficult, or strongest tidal currents we actually have on the coast, where it rushes literally. The might of it rushes down a channel. But it does look like a river. There are bridges going across it.
Well, I'm assuming there's certain areas where you kind of have a ford, or maybe you go there at low tide and it's relatively safe to cross.
At very low tides, at certain times of the year. So, the Romans would have been quite strategic in that move to be able to walk across. And the fact that they were having a ritual as well at that time would have been probably significant to the moon phase. I can't actually remember which it is, but that would have actually governed the tidal flow. So
that's a very good point.
I think Janta wants to say something there about the tidal thing. Janta, are you there? Oh, I don't know. They're typing in at the bottom there that Janta wants to say something. I don't know if they're still in the chat.
he'd have to rejoin the call. Oh,
there he is. Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
It is working then. Hi. I'd just like to say that I lived in Wales for 17 years, and my son is named Kaio.
He'd have to rejoin the call.
Hello?
Yeah, you're listening. You're listening. You left a radio. Somebody has their radio going on the delay, and we're listening to ourselves 5 seconds ago.
I don't know. I want that.
What's going on?
Summer, you need to turn your radio player off.
Oh, right. Hello?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Can I speak?
Yeah, that's it, I think.
I can speak. Right, my eldest son is named Kaio, and there's a village called Kaio in Wales. It's right by the Dolocothe gold mines, where the Romans invaded that part of Wales to extract the gold. They also arrived for the mead. And,
really?
Yeah. They're the two main reasons. Now, this area where the village of Kaio exists is actually, the whole area is a temple known as, there's a village there called Pim Saint, which means Pim meaning five saints. The whole region was a temple, and it's actually, although there is less known about it, it's actually more than likely the mother temple for Glastonbury and Avebury. The research that was conducted on it was conducted by Lewis Edwards, who who didn't get his work published, but his work, and let me just tell you about the temple. The temple is actually a zodiac temple, so the natural features around the land within the temple area correspond with the zodiac in the sky. Now, the Romans constantly had a lot of problems coming into this region for the gold because it was a temple. So Caius, the Roman general, intermarried with Helen so that they could get on with their work, and there was peace, because it was also, I don't know the Welsh translation, but it was also Caio was known as the Bloody Village, because the Romans found it very difficult to beat down the natives. So they did this thing where they did the intermarrying. The Zodiac Temple itself, all the information, when Lewis Edward died, all his studies on the subject, he was published in several magazines before he died on aspects of the temple area. But his parents, his father was a dean, and he had all the research that was done on the Pim-Saint Zodiac Temple destroyed. So we lost that information, but I'd just like to say...
Do you know roughly what time period that was?
I have no idea. Absolutely. All I know is that there were star worshippers. So, long time ago.
This is kind of a part one for me. Talking about getting used to the geography, I just figured out that Norfolk and Suffolk aren't towns. They're actually like counties or something. I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I think of Norfolk, I think of Newport News, Virginia. But anyway, so I appreciate any feedback in this. I'm talking about areas I've barely even looked at on the map. But I did want to do something on the history of the Romans coming into Britain, and this was pretty much what I've dug up in the past 2 weeks. So thank you for that. I'd like to look into that. The what was it?
The Pim-Saint Zodiac.
No, the Delicati gold mines?
The Delicati gold mines, they reopened about 20 years ago, and it is actually a museum for visitors, open to visitors.
Cool. Yeah, I'm assuming that probably happened after Boudica.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I really don't know. Why am I saying yeah? Sorry, I can't help you with anything else.
From we're all kind of working on this together, figuratively speaking, in the conversation. What I've gathered is the first, more or less, the first 7 or 8 years, from 43 to 51 AD, they were just trying to secure between London and Colchester and the sea around southeast England. That's it. After that, they had the whole thing with Boudica in the year 60, and after that there was no real considerable uprising ever again, with the exception, of course, of Wales. And that they got along with the Welsh through intermarrying makes a lot of sense, because the Romans would have learned their lesson, and that's the easier way to do it, so they're going to do it that way.
I think it was probably the only way.
Yeah.
What about Scotland, Miles? How far up did they go?
They never got into Scotland.
They never got into Scotland at all.
No, they might have. I know they had to fight the Scots, but I think the Scots were actually going south into North England and attacking the Romans preemptively, and that's why they had to build Hadrian's Wall, and then there was another wall after that they had to build even further south, and then eventually they had to give. When the Roman Empire started to break up in the mid-400s, Britain was the first province to go. That was the first province the Romans marched out of. Was Britain. And getting back to the river, there's a story of Julius Caesar when he was invading Gaul. He marched into Germany at one point, and what happened was there were two tribes, two German tribes. I don't remember their names, but they marched into Gaul and to resettle. Caesar came in there with his 5 legions, slaughtered every single one of them, man, woman, and child, then went over to the Rhine River, built a suspension bridge in 10 days, marched the army across, proceeded to kill 430,000 Germans at random. He just went around the countryside just killing people, burning their villages and sowing. He didn't sow salt, but he burned everything. Then he came back across the bridge he built, burned it, and the Germans never messed with the Romans for a good 200 years after that. So, Roman policy involved a lot of just you just set an example and hope that scares everybody else into submission. That's why you have Caradicus didn't put up with that, but the queen I keep forgetting her name. Cardilagua, what is it? Excuse me. Cartimandua, yeah. That's why Cartimandua ended up going with the Romans. Now, after that, you have, so by 51 AD, that southeastern part of Rome is held. Caradicus is out of the picture, and the rebels are then led by Cartimandua's husband, Venusius, and Venusius sort of runs around for the next 10 years, harrying and harassing the Romans at every turn, but there's not many sources on what Venusius did. We know that he joined the rebels. Did he leave his wife? How did that work? Did he kill her? Did she die? Was there a plot that then was successful? I don't know. And how did Venusius die? Once the story of Boudica gets started in the year 60, you don't hear anything about Venusius anymore. It's like he was never around. So that's kind of weird. Now, beginning the story of Boudica. As we saw with the Brigantes, the Romans basically scared off or bought off as many British tribes as possible. The Iceni were one of these tribes who had negotiated an agreement with the Romans. And the king of the Iceni was Prasatagus. Yeah, or Prasatagus. I guess that's the easiest way to say it. Prasatagus. Prasatagus, that was Boudica's husband. He was the king. And he had a will set up so that after he died, half of his property would be left to the Romans and half of it would be left to Boudica. The idea was that Boudica would just take his place as being a subject king as he had been to the Romans. Well, the Romans, according to one documentary that I saw, didn't accept the idea of women owning property, so they refused to acknowledge her part of the agreement. But I disagree with that. The Romans did acknowledge women's right to own property. Roman women. In this context, it was just silly not to take all of it anyway, because Boudica, being a woman with no sons, was seen as having or being no kind of threat to the Romans. So it was kind of like taking candy from a baby. The Romans just thought that nothing would come of it. She doesn't have any sons. Yeah, she's going to be pissed, but what is she going to do? And on top of that, that's when they do the infamous scourging and raping scene, where Boudica is, flogged while her daughters are repeatedly raped in front of her, in front of the town. What town this was, I don't know. I'm assuming it's some town up in Norfolk. I don't know. Up that way. And by the way, Cassius Dio is one of the two sources that we have. The other one is Tacitus. But Cassius Dio doesn't mention the names of her two daughters. So we're probably never going to know what they were called, what their names were. And I was wrong a few shows ago when I mentioned that she was brought to Rome where they did all of this. No, they did it somewhere, like I said, in Norfolk. And the name Boudica, this is kind of fun. The name was originally Boudica, B-O-D-I-C-A, good old Latin. But it was copied down wrong about 500 years ago, and somebody spelled it Boadicea. There's been a confusion about it ever since. However, the definition of her name in whatever Celtic language the Iceni were speaking means victory. Apparently, Queen Victoria I was named after her in that spirit from, I think it was a Prince Albert. I don't know. I'm really bad with the royalty because I hate royalty. But anyway, that might be interesting for y'all. And at this point, I'd like to pause a little bit and reflect a bit on the culture of these Iron Age British peoples, because that part, to me, is kind of more interesting. Otherwise, it's just military tactics, which is also cool, but there's only so much of the story. The Iceni people are one of at least dozens of tribes in England that would have had their own language, probably all within the same language family, but different languages nonetheless. And they had a fairly advanced metallurgical technology for making swords and a relatively unique form of jewelry. They had these golden wires where they'd wrap 8 golden wires or cords or wires into this sort of neck ring that's called a torque. Usually it's spelled T-O-R-C. Some people spell it French T-O-R-Q-U-E. But it was sort of like a neck ring thing. And this was their unique specialty. There's a big find of these near a town called Snettisham in Norfolk, in case you're interested in going there. I believe there's a museum of such in that area somewhere. And they also were making their own coins. They had a relatively centralized rule where they had I guess you call them dynasties of ruling families of tribes that would govern areas, I would assume, roughly the size of what now is the county, or do you call it county, or would it be I don't know what it is, but the size of Norfolk. And they would have agreements and periodic wars and things like that with their neighbors. Typical stuff. Typical Iron Age people in Europe. Now, compared to the Romans, they're very quaint, to say the least. The armor of a Roman soldier, for example, at this time would have been worth that of a small village. So let's say in modern terms it's nearly £1 million, enough to buy up either a whole apartment block or a pretty large grouping of small homes and farms somewhere. The average Iceni fighter they probably would have had a sword. They might have had a shield. They definitely didn't have any armor. Their nobles and royalty would have had armor, but it still wouldn't have been up to the same quality as the Romans, just because of the sheer expense. And there's the intimidation factor when you see, 10,000 people wearing what at the time would have been like, some sort of RoboCop spacesuit thing with all these fancy guns, and here you are with your little, pitchfork. So there was that factor. There's a Roman watermill that's been reconstructed in London at the Museum of London that's on display. It's a kind that would have been used around this time period. According to Dr. Gillian Carr of University Cambridge, the land of southern England was under more agricultural cultivation at that point in time in the middle of the 1st century AD than at any point after that until the end of the Great War. So I thought that was really cool. I'd like to look into that further. There was more food being grown in southern England in about 60 AD than there had been up until modern mechanized agricultural practices after the end of the First World War. So we're talking about 1920. And like the natives in America, the native Britons had no idea, or they had no idea of land ownership. They held all the agricultural and hunting lands in common. You would have had areas of dominion. Oh, this is where we hunt. This is where we plant. But the idea of buying and selling and passing down to children and negotiating and swapping hunks and areas of land was not in their system, in their culture. And their common religion, as most of the scholars say, I think this is debatable, but it was essentially this druid-based paganism, more or less a kind of nature worship, and I would suspect a little bit of ancestor worship. This the Romans did their best to crush. Not because they gave a damn about what they were worshiping, but because the Druids wanted the Romans out. They wanted to be in charge of their native land, and the Romans wanted to be in charge of it. So, there you go. Need to kill the Druids, as far as the Romans are concerned. And I believe the Druids continued to exist well into the middle of the first millennium, up till about maybe 500 AD, somewhere in Wales, and probably in Scotland, up until the early Christian era. And I have no idea about the history of the early Christians of the Christianization of England. I'm not very familiar with that. I know by 900, it was pretty much all Christianized, except for maybe some of the fringes. I don't know if anybody else has anything to comment on that one, on that point.
Yeah, I think it was quite brutal and quite forceful.
Oh yeah.
They amalgamated the two. I've read a few things about that because I was a member of the Druid Order for a bit, and I studied some old text of bards and druids. Mm-hmm. I think all kings at that time had a kind of a druid as an advisor. And in a way, it was propaganda though. The bards were the lyricists at the time, and they wrote all these poems about how great their villages were, their kings were, and stuff,
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was quite interesting. But I know there was a big, call of the feminine at that time, because there's a deity, a druid deity or Irish deity called Sheila Nigog. And I know there've been cases found where, from sort of temples and places of worship and burial mounds, her effigies were kind of taken and buried. Archaeologists have found groups of them sort of buried together, where the feminine was kind of, well, it was a separation, wasn't it? A separation of, a divide and conquer thing, and then a kind of an amalgamation of the Christian into the pagan, so that everyone accepted it gradually, as opposed to just being hit over the head with it, really.
Yeah, I know the early Christians had a tendency of building their churches on top of the pagan temples that had existed there before, so, it's kind of like, well, you're going here every day anyway, how about you just go here on Sunday, and instead of, Odin, it's Jesus.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's weird, actually, because, obviously the Romans had their kind of pagan sort of beliefs as well, so...
Yeah. The Romans didn't care what you believed, they just wanted you to submit to them as far as their taking over your country.
But as a peoples, they had a tradition and what you could call a pagan tradition,
Of course it was pagan.
I mean, I remember as a kid, I read about this Saturnalia, the kind of the worship at Christmas they used to do, and
Saturnalia.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm no good at pronunciation, and obviously I've got this accent where everything comes out bad anyway.
Well, that's okay.
So,
where is your accent from? I'm always curious.
Well, it's funny actually. I'm in limbo with my accent because this is it's a perfect example, isn't it, of divide and conquer. I'm actually in Sandwell now, which is in between Birmingham in central England and Dudley in the West, so we're in the West Midlands. So I'm bordering Black Country, which is a thicker accent. So people from here, I've been here about 10 years, can tell I'm not from here. But when I go home, because the accent's more, I can't do that. The accent's more, where I come from in Sheldon, which is the other side of Birmingham, going towards Coventry. When I go there, they say I'm a yam yam. That's what they call it. Yam yam. So yeah, I'm in limbo. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and isn't that amazing? Just the dialect change and the kind of reaction to it, and that's purely in this radius of the West Midlands, where we're all incredibly close and all the same peoples, really. You know, it's amazing.
Can I just mention? Go on, Paul.
It's just one bit where you mentioned the word pagan. I know what you're talking about. It does describe what it was. But I always get a feeling that the word is deemed by a people, a group, or an organisation outside of what it actually was. You know, like derogatory of it, even. It's just
I agree. I totally agree. I think it just is a broad term. And it really just purely denotes sort of that connection with the earth and using your intuition and, you know, which everyone did back in the day, you know, before they started thinking too much about what they could get and how they could control things, you know, and it was, there's lots of connotations being put on it that, you know, it's that thing about words again, which I can't think about too much because my brain starts hurting.
I was always told that pagan technically means anything that's not one of the major religions.
Yeah, I think it's I think
that's the broadest definition of it. That's, you know, some people would say Hinduism is pagan, some people would say it's not. You know.
I think, the definitions have changed along the years. I mean, now the sort of Druid tradition is revived from, I may get this wrong, I don't want to offend anyone, I would say, the 60s, as is various traditions along the pagan lines, Wiccan and things like that.
Actually, it got, what we think of as the neo-pagan movement got started in the very late 19th, early 20th centuries. But, I don't really need to go to a break, but I need to grab something to drink, so if you can give me 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Hi, it's Rupert, and when I get done slaying dragons, I like to curl up with my Rupert teddy bear and listen to the Dark City. The Dark City, where a weirdo like me can absolutely be himself.
This is a public health announcement. Cannabis cures cancer.
Welcome to the show.
What show is that?
Welcome to the show.
I'm trying to connect now.
Unable to connect. If you have an internet connection, go fuck yourself, because it doesn't matter.
We're back on. I just threw a couple of jingles on Miles.
Okay, thanks. Well, anyway, that's fascinating about the accents. I've always been interested in that, because the accents in America are pretty simple. You just sort of have New York, Boston, South, North, Middle, and West Coast. It's not terribly complicated, and none of them are that different. Well, except for the South, but anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, Miles, because America's so big and yet England is so small, but yet we have retained.
It's because America's so young. England is so much older than America.
Yeah.
Would you consider a 100-year-old building old in the town that you grew up in?
No, I know.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't. There's. I would almost say by the number of towns and zip codes there are in the United States, almost half of them don't even have a 100-year-old building in it.
My mum's house was built in 1420. That's considered as very old.
Mine was built in 1898.
Yeah.
I'm
in a very old building, and it's from about 1860.
The estate that I actually live on, they started construction in 1889, and it was completed in 1898. So I'm giving myself the youngest age. It could be a little bit older than that.
Right.
But the thing is, the Victorians, when they were building these properties, they built them to last. Nearly everything they built to last. So, yeah, there is. I see what you're saying, Miles, but I think America's as old. You know, the culture within the United States, as it's known now, of course, or the modern white culture is known about. We're referring to that the starting of the Western cultures within the Roman, I suppose, spread across the world.
Well, you know, the Greeks started.
To me, most of us in England. To me, most of us in England, Miles, still live as Romans. We call ourselves English or Welsh or Irish or Scots, but we actually live just as the Romans did.
Yeah, you know, I don't fully agree with that.
Well, there's the
because you don't have as many apartments. No, I'm serious. The Germans and the French proportionally live. Much more of them have condominiums, flats, and apartments, as opposed to a house with a little yard. That style of
I meant
population.
Under the social system, not actually the properties we live in. Excuse me, that was my leap.
Well, no, that's how you get social systems, is by how the patterning of people is dispersed. Also, your language is German. It's not Romance. Now, there was a period where you had a trilingual England. The wedding vows of love, honor, and cherish are actually using 3 languages. Love was English, honor was Latin, and cherish was French, actually. This was after the Normans came in. You had Old English being spoken, you had Norman French being spoken, and then you had the Latin of the church that was used to communicate with the rest of Europe for trading and business purposes.
Well, of course, the church is now the ruling force of the Roman Empire. Of course.
So you're saying your government was modeled after the Catholic Church, which was a continuation of the Roman system, the Roman
we're actually,
way of governing?
We're actually governed by a minority that enforces their will through the use of violence. It's pretty much the Roman basic manner.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, all right. Yeah. I'd have to agree with you.
Slave you.
Agree with you there. Okay.
So, yeah. It seems to be, and like I say, although we can demonstrate it here within what happened in this island, which is so-called England, it can be actually seen or mirrored, I think, pretty much all over the Western world.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. But the Greeks really did start it. The Romans weren't terribly original or creative. They were just really good at beating up people. And the people they beat up had kids, and those kids grew up under the Roman rule, and that's all they knew, so monkey see, monkey do, and it kept perpetuating itself.
Yeah, what's that? It's Roman. Where did we get it from? Don't ask questions. It's Roman.
Yeah, that sounds Catholic. But anyway, somebody recently published a map of dialects in the United States that I thought was kind of neat. One of the criterion was whether or not somebody if the word pin and pen, P-I-N and P-E-N, if they rhyme or not. That was one of the accent markers. And there's a little line between Virginia and Maryland where there's a difference of that. I thought that was neat.
Yeah, Robo's putting in the room about the period of the Vandals. Now, I can't remember. I'm rubbish with dates, and the history's not too great. But if I remember rightly, they were Were they the Germanic tribes? Were they in?
They're one of the Germanic tribes. You had the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals, and I think the Vandals were the ones that actually made it all the way to Morocco and North Africa, and then the Ostrogoths and Visigoths went into Spain and France. And
the word vandalism comes from the Vandals, doesn't it?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, and weren't one of those the travelling tradesmen, like I think we know as maybe the gypsies in modern day?
I don't think they were the same people because they were a Germanic. They spoke a Germanic language, somewhat related to Gothic, which later ended up becoming what you now think of as German. But no, I think the Romani people, they came over from somewhere in Asia, well before 500 BC.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, and they've been getting kicked around and moving all around Europe between Kiev and Madrid for 1,000 years by the time the Vandals were running down there. And if it behooved them at one point to side with the Romans or side with the Vandals, they didn't care. They did it. You know?
Yeah, that sounds familiar as well, doesn't it?
It's kind of like if you have a bunch of lions fighting. Well, the Romani are kind of like, hummingbirds sort of buzzing around. You know? They're always there, but you have all these other bigger players going on at the same time that history usually focuses more light on.
Yeah, they do seem to. You see, I thought they were connected to the nomadics of those.
Well, they are nomads, but they come
right.
from what we could tell, they probably come from either eastern Iran or western India.
Right. Yeah. Wow. I was completely going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and I think there's also Romani people up in like Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and that area. There might even be some in Mongolia. I wouldn't be surprised.
You're going on about the language and stuff. I mean, I was in America for a while, and I noticed, like in England, well, mostly where I am, there's a lot of use of old sayings. Yeah, I did a bit of research on it, getting into what all the old sayings were, but they always seem to become in pairs, which balance each other out. But when they're actually used in language and stuff, I don't know whether it's intentional or not. It doesn't really matter. They seem to be used one-sided to steer something. But what I noticed is not as many old sayings were used in America. And the other bit you were saying about rhyming and stuff, and with Nerys going on about the bards and stuff, I think it's pretty important. I'm putting importance on the use of rhyme and the use of memory structures and how people were taught things through a non-written down. You said something about like language and stuff and that lot. And then I was looking at the runes being a Thuthark rather than an alphabet, being based from sort of like the Latin, the Roman.
What's a Thuthark? What do you mean like a syllabary?
I don't know. That sounds familiar, but what I mean by a Thuthark is something that doesn't use alpha, beta in its structure. It doesn't start with A. Like Celtic, there was no K, I think, or no C. I can't remember which way around now. But it's a different structure of symbols.
Yeah, there's no J in either, is there?
There's no J in Latin either. But
there's just one little bit from chat. Sparky put, and he wrote it down. Gypsy equals Egyptian. And when you look at the actual text of it, it's kind of E.
Yeah, and for all I know, that could have been when they were named. They figured that they came from Egypt.
Exactly. Yeah. I was the significance.
You know why we called turkeys? Because we thought they came from Turkey, the country. There was a bird that the Turks used to trade from the Orient with the Europeans in the 1500s, and they called it a turkey. The Egyptian think it was a Wait, no, wait, give it. Tell this.
Alright, the Egyptian thing, it was a ruse. Like, I know a lot about the gypsies. The Egyptian thing was a ruse, and it was because they thought they were the people of God, and it was done to get shit from the church at the time. That's all I can really say about it, but yeah.
What period was that, like 1500s, 1200s?
It's in one of the books, man, I don't remember. But this was when the gypsies were around in the medieval era, I know that.
Cool. Thank you. That was my roommate Jesse passing by my room and had to comment on that.
That was really cool. And again, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? It was a ruse to get shit from the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I'm beginning to wonder how much of this information is actually historical, or we may have to change it to the news.
Well, that's the thing, man. It all depends on how you go about approaching the evidence. You know, if you wanna look at the evidence like, oh, I looked up this and these people are thinking this way, therefore this must have been the way it was, so all that other stuff is bullshit, you're not gonna get very far. The world's not gonna make very much sense once you start leaving your little comfort zones. You know, that narrow way of thinking will work if you're only working in one selective area. But if you start comparing world history and cultures around the planet, that's a redundant statement, but still, then you're going to start noticing these gaps. They become more and more obvious.
Yeah, one of them was, I don't know, it's a little bit of evidence that keeps jumping into my head, and that's the ballast from the Northmen's, or what we call the Viking ships. Yeah, that's it just seems to knock a hole in what I was told about history. I mean, and now we know that the Christian invaders were invaders, but of course the history I was taught in school was that the Christians were defending this land from these barbaric invaders.
I would say that they weren't so much invaders as they were converters. You know, they went in with the idea, you know, the Roman Empire or whatever kingdom was in charge, you know, they didn't care so long as they converted over and acknowledged the church. So, you know, yeah, they're invading, but they're invading in this weird political sort of way. It's like, you know, if you don't become a Tory, I'm going to kill your children.
And then they steal the land.
You know? Yeah, and then once you vote Tory, after that, it's like, okay, no problem. You know, it's weird.
It's
weird that people would ever do that.
Yeah, but it's not just that simple, is it? It's once they've coerced the people, then they intellectually steal the land, their entire wealth, the mineral, everything. They steal it all intellectually with the book. So maybe that was the rise of the pen being mightier than the sword.
Earlier on, Miles, you mentioned something about the south of England. I was thinking of Kent, because we generally call it the Gardens of England. I don't know if it's the same.
Yeah, Kent is like one of 3 other counties I know. And just to clarify, they are counties, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So, and you reverse it, so it'd be County Kent. Or is that just an Irish thing?
It's Paul. It's Kent a county.
You get.
Is it Kent County or County?
Oh,
Kent?
now we've got to be really careful here in case there's someone who's actually from Kent. My father was from Kent, and I should know this, and I really don't. But there are a man of Kent and a Kentish man. It depended on which side of the river they lived, I think.
Oh, really?
If my memory serves me right, yeah, something.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so that's how they look at it: a man of Kent or a Kentish man. But yeah, the county of Kent, yes. Oh,
okay.
I know, is it Kent in the county of somewhere? Oh, I'll have to look now.
That's why I asked.
You
mentioned something before. You mentioned something about when you were talking about like the garden and stuff like that. You mentioned there was no ownership of land. that there was. This is my interpretation. That you said
that's what I heard. Yeah, they did.
There was common land with hunting rights. There was no ownership.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There would have been areas of control, sort of like when I think of the Native Americans. You would have had, this is where we hunt. That's where you hunt. But if all of the buffalo go somewhere else, we're going to go somewhere else, and then we're going to carve out a little area where, okay, that's where we hunt, and that's where you hunt. But the idea of, go back to the exact spot where I was born, well, how the hell do I know where that was? We're constantly moving around. These people weren't really moving around much, but they also didn't buy and sell land. It was just, of course, they would have fought wars with each other. Maybe they would have had a contestation over a river, but then again, maybe not. And maybe that's why the Druids acted as sort of like a peacekeeper middleman between the various kingdoms. When they would want to fight over the access of water to a river, they'd say, hey, the river's God. Leave it the fuck alone. Each of you is going to have an equal amount of it, or you're going to piss the river off and it'll turn into blood or something.
Sounds like a good possibility.
Yeah. So the area that I was talking about when I was talking about the tribes, you've got Essex, Suffolk, and Norfolk. Norfolk was where Boudica was from, and then over to the north and west, Lincolnshire was where I don't know why I can never remember this lady's name. Cardamandua. That's Cardamandua. Lincolnshire was where Cardamandua was the queen.
There's one question I've got. Yeah, I don't know if you call it a dream or a vision thing I had, or lucid dreaming, whatever you call it. But I'm really interested in this, like Brigantians, Bridget, Bright. Do you know anything about any sort of like goddess or entity, sort of like what any of these tribes worshipped?
Not a clue, other than that they worship the earth, and the earth is usually interpreted as being feminine, as it rightly should be. And with a planting culture, you would have had a goddess of some sort. What they called it isn't really as important. You could kind of get the mythology without knowing the name. It's the idea that if you plant a bean, the bean comes up out of the ground, and you have the body. You cut the body, kill it, bury it, wait a year, grows back. How's that work? That's generally equated with cycles. What else do you equate with cycles? Women's menstrual cycles. What else do women's menstrual cycles do? They produce children. Life coming out of life. Life being taken, consumed, killed, buried, coming back. It's all very feminine. It's a common mythological motif.
But it could also be locked to the lunar phase, removing the division between masculine and feminine, as the moon affects all bodies of water, and the male...
Water's usually feminine too in most cultures.
But the male being as much water as the female. The religious ideologies have often been put in there to create division, not only between creed and colour, but between sexes also.
Well, sexes are always different, but they need to, are they facing each other and acting in accord, or is one dominating over the other? It's usually the issue. I'm sorry, you want to say something?
I know a little bit about Bridget as a goddess in the pagan tradition.
Do tell.
Well, I mean, it's kind of independently, I would say, really, from a druid, certainly not other pagan traditions. They're more focuses of intent, and they're a breakdown of your psyche. So you have this god for a good harvest, and really you're focusing your intent, which, depending on your beliefs, personally, you focus. I think I've talked about this, Bob, before. You focus on your harvest, you focus on your plants, and that gives an energy shift for them to grow. But Bridget was,
Oh God.
Yeah, plants. If you put them in a pot, they know whether or not you give a damn if they die. Believe me.
But Bridget specifically was. I may get some of these details wrong. It's ages since I've been hot on this stuff, but equinox, right? So you'd focus on Bridget as a coming in of the light and a coming in as of the new growth. So you would focus on her then, and I have done in the past personally. Actually, it's quite a pleasant vision with her coming in. She's got this cloak. Oh God, I'm going. Oh no, I won't reveal them things.
Is she also associated with Beltane, the halfway point between the vernal equinox and the summer solstice?
Not so much as far as I'm aware, because you focus on her in the spring and she's an intent for a good harvest and the new growth. And then what people would often do is actually focus on her in the autumn and make effigies out of corn of Bridget and then burn them. I'm going to get this
now you say corn.
And burn them in autumn.
Well, you say corn, and I have to leap on that because you didn't have corn until 1540.
Yeah, well, it would have been wheat ears.
Yeah, it would have been whatever.
Okay.
Yes, I've made them out of corn personally, but yes, I haven't got the exact. Yeah,
there's some evidence that the Turks actually were importing corn into Germany before Columbus set sail.
In Norfolk, as I pronounce it in the accent I'm using at the moment, there is a lot of corn dollies there. They call them, but they're not actually made from corn. They're made from the wheat and stuff. Just to add that point in. The reason I mentioned Bridget before, the dream vision, whatever you want to call it, I don't know what it'll trigger in other people. I've got Nerys. I'll wait until Nerys comes back because I like her. Oh, she's back. You back, Nerys?
Hello. Yes, I'm there, yeah.
Yeah, the dream vision thing I had was that there was a group of hunters on a horseback, going hunting deer. Now, they were on this hunt and they got to a clearing in a wood. And I was actually in this dream and sort of felt it, But there was light coming through sort of like a ring of trees which shone down onto a deer that was pregnant. And basically this entity, which I'm calling Bridget or Bright or whatever you want to say, didn't say anything. And all the hunters looked at it and went, right, pregnant deer, right, let's go and hunt somewhere else. That's why I'm asking all this stuff, because it just seems to stick in my head over and over again. I don't know if you got any input on that, Nerys, that fits in with anything you've heard.
Well, there are other elements to Bridget, because in some things I've read, she's portrayed as a triple goddess, linked to the Triskel. I'm going to get these. I'd have to look it up again to get
that's the Triskelly, sort of like a 3-pointed yin yang. I've studied quite a lot of so-called Celtic.
No, it's a 3-pointed swastika is what it is.
It's like a spiral.
Yeah, it's a swastika. Anyway, I'm not trying to be a dick or anything. It's just I'm really annoyed that the Nazis destroyed that damn symbol, because all it is another of many forms of the spiral, which is arguably one of the most ancient symbols humans have ever created.
So, Miles, is it a good thing or a bad thing that I've got one tattooed on my back?
What kind?
Well, it's just a Triskel. It's just 3 spirals.
Oh, okay. Well, good. I think it's great.
In the illuminated manuscripts, like the Book of Kells and Lindisfarne and a few other ones, it's been used, but mainly the symbols used on, I think they call them zoomorphs, which are graphical forms of animals interlaced between the knotwork, and they usually put it on anything that's an animal, like hairy beasts, not the reptiles though, humans, deer and stuff.
This symbol you're speaking of, is it also the symbol known as Antakarana? It's like 3 number 7s?
It probably is, but it just looks like a yin yang with three tiers instead.
Ah, right, yeah. Which is the
They usually trace back to the sun and cycles.
Yeah, it's adopted by the Catholics within the Trinity, isn't it? The Father, the Son, the Spirit.
Yeah, that's where I've seen it in sort of like the illuminated manuscript, but
yeah, we've got
whether it comes from the Christian stuff or let's say the other side, I don't know.
We've got a 6 foot by 6 foot banner with it on in the garage. Mm. It was the Pure Juice banner of the meeting at Stonehenge.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, getting back to the geography, though, Kent and London, like Greater London County or whatever, that would have been that first beachhead that I was talking about. That the Romans established the first decade they were there. And then they had the tribes in Essex, Suffolk, and Norfolk, and Lincolnshire that were bought off. And then towards the center, in the Midlands, and getting towards Wales, and the rest of the country, you had people wanting to fight back.
Northerners.
Chris Sparky in the room, he's put...
Not just Northerners, you got people in Oxfordshire, and Berkshire, and Hampshire, and Wiltshire, and Somerset, and Devon, and Cornwall,
and then you get to
Shropshire. Boy, that's a fun word.
Then you get about halfway. Then you get halfway up the country, and the progress slows down, and then they get into the borders, and they pretty much stop, and the raids then are working in the other direction.
Yeah.
So yeah, they would like to try and still to this day say that the indigenous people of this land we're on are divided into English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, European, Muslim, Christian, Jew. They still do it right to this day. Of course, it's preposterous. We're all males and females of
yeah, you just talk funny. That's all. That's the only difference. Y'all just talk funny. Everybody thinks everybody else talks funny. That's the only difference.
I don't think you talk funny at all, Miles.
Neither do I.
You should.
Well, we can actually. The Northerners can pretty much comprehend what anyone speaks in English. Maybe because we speak the worst of what's known to be Queen's English.
I can't comprehend anybody from Newcastle. It sounds like another language to me. I don't clue what they're saying.
Oh, I had that when I went to Scotland. I was surprised because I had Scottish friends and everything. And then we was in a taxi and I couldn't understand a word he was saying.
Yeah.
I must admit I have had to translate for Rick, being Canadian, on a number of occasions because of some of the dialects we have in the UK. Yeah. Especially in the north here, you've only got to travel 20 miles. And, Nerys mentioned about Dudley. Or Dudley. As in, Dudley, you can't actually say, you have to actually say Dudley.
Dudley.
You can't.
Yeah, that's it. That's why everyone says you're a yam yam, because you see, instead of how are you?
Well, shouldn't it be like
how am ya? That's where the yam yam comes from.
We had somebody up here from that area and that lot. They called him Yam Yam. I was thinking, why do you keep calling him Yam Yam? When you said it, you went, right.
That's where it comes from. It's the changing around of sentences. It's not just a tonal thing, So like now, I know I say instead of my over there, when you talked about your mom, you'd say our mom. And then over here, you're saying, me mom. Things like that. It's fascinating, isn't it, language?
Yeah, it is. And of course, there used to be, actual Kentish and Kentish, Cornwallish, and there are other little dialects as recently as, I think, about 80 years ago, right?
Yeah, but
Cornwall actually had a language, didn't they?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Cornwall did have its own language.
Yeah. Well, it's still a dialect of English.
The people on the barge, the communities that used to live on the canalways, they had their own language, their own dialects. No more outside it, really. It's pretty much, or almost completely died out now.
Well, actually, I want to segue with this language stuff into something else I wanted to talk about. The word Iceni. I've known the word for about 10 years now, and not that I've ever made a major study of Boudica or anything like that. I've been familiar with the story. And I always wanted to spell it with an L, like Larry, because I have really bad hearing, and I try to make sense out of things that I hear, and when I hear Iceni, it comes out Lyceni to me for some reason. But it's spelled I-C-E-N-I. And I'd like to bring up the Great English vowel shift at this point. I hate to do this to you, but if you say the word A, or if you say the vowel A, and then say E, you're moving up in the mouth. A, it's higher in the mouth, and the vowels shifted up. In Latin, an E would be pronounced A. In English today, it's E. A-E. The I in Latin would be pronounced E. Today it's pronounced I. E-I. You're going up in the mouth. So it's Iceni to us. To the Iceni, it would have been Iceni. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I've been learning some songs in Old English. That's really helpful, actually. I like singing.
That is the single most explanatory thing I can say about English spelling, because when it really annoys me when I go to India, or you get an Indian word, because sometimes they'll spell like, seed on A, they might spell SEEDHANEY or something like that, where it's like, why don't you just do SID? Seed. SID. There you go. Latin. Makes sense. Every time you see an I in Latin, it's E. That's how it's pronounced. Every single time. No exception. How lovely is that, coming from our Anglo-Saxon background with this horrible mess of a spelling system that we have. I mean, ugh.
It's like with the children. They insist on teaching them phonics.
I didn't learn how to spell until about 5 years. No, I didn't learn how to spell until I was about 26 years old.
You teach them phonics, or that's what the schools say you should teach them for the first few years, and then you spend the next couple of years going, oh, actually, that isn't pronounced like that. It's pronounced that way. And that one you don't even say at all,
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was in the States, I was living with children and my wife, but they came back with like schoolwork and it was American English, and I tried helping them out, but as soon as I got to cat, cup, and cap, I gave up because of the use of the vowels. I had to say to my wife, I said, you're going to have to do this. I can't do it because of the vowels. Going to do the maths instead.
The vowel, if you think about it, the vowel A can make almost every sound. If you, like, A and E can do almost everything. Take the word entrepreneur, for example. An 8-year-old would never guess it's spelled with an E. Entrepreneur. How would you spell that? A, maybe an O. Yeah, E. That's what it is. No. I mean, E can do almost all of them. And I get incredibly frustrated sometimes where it's just sort of like you're just running through vowel permutations. Like, all right, start it with an A, then do an E, then do an I, then do an A, then do an I and an I, then do an A, then an E and an E, then start with the I and switch it, do I-A-A, I-A-E, I-E-A, Just, ugh. Hate this.
Miles, you've really inspired me. I've always had difficulty with spelling.
Me too.
And I've always thought I'd been a bit broken, but you've just actually really, for me anyway, explained to me it's not me, again, that's broken.
No, it's the language. It's all the language.
The spelling that's actually broken. The language itself is is pretty broken. So
one of the things that helped me out with the GH, like laugh, enough, and the way you guys spell plow. You know why it's spelled that way? It used to be pronounced the way it's spelled. It was plow, enoch, loch. You know, the GH was that thing, because Old English was essentially another branch of German. And over the years, with the way language naturally changes, that became an F sound, but we retained the spelling. Or it became a W sound in the case of plow. Night with the K was pronounced kneeked. You know, kind of like the word Knievel. You still see that KN in some words even to this day. That's a relic from Old English.
A bit like the Knights of Ni.
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess I should finish up here. Get on with a little bit of military history and the Boudica campaign, which wasn't much of a campaign, but that's what we're going to call it. Her campaign began in the year 60, and by this time, like it was...
Did she have a brother?
Sorry?
Did she have a brother?
Not that I'm aware of. If she did, that'd be fascinating, but I don't know.
I'll try and find some links to that then, because I read that somewhere, that she actually had a brother, and he may have got involved in the Roman army, so...
As far as I know, there's only two sources. One's from Cassius Dio and the other's from Tacitus. And if I could get copies of those guys, whatever they wrote about it, you'd have all the information right there at your fingertips, because anything else you're going to read about it is going to be somebody else's interpretation of what one of those two guys wrote. There's nothing else that's been written about her except 1,000-something years after she died.
Okay, yeah.
But anyway, what we do know is in the year 60, that's when she got, flogged, her daughters raped and all that stuff. That was after her husband died. And that Venusius guy, he's out of the scene now. I'm going to try to get more into him if there is anything else to find. Now you have Gaius Suetonius Paulinus. I watched like 4 documentaries this week on this just to get some, spectrum. I mean, not spectrum, but just perspective on what's going on. And some of them were actually calling Suetonius Paulinus, because that's his last name. But I remember he was always called Suetonius in my Latin class, and he wrote the book The 12 Caesars. And The 12 Caesars is a famous account of the first 12 emperors of Rome, written by this dude. And I read that, partly in Latin, unfortunately. But anyway... I'm going to call him Suetonius, so if you think of him as Paulinus or hear Paulinus later, I'm still talking about the same guy. He was the governor and general of Britannia after that Scapula guy. And Nero was emperor at this time. Nero became emperor in 54 AD, and he died in 68. Now, in the year 60, like I said, Boudica led her people, as well as the tribe to the south of her, the Travantines, or Travantines. They're from Suffolk, and they both wanted to attack Roman holdings. Now, the Travantine capital was what's now Colchester, and there was a temple built to the Emperor Claudius, the emperor in charge when they first had that first wave of invasions. And they used British slaves to build this temple. And Boudica came in, that was the first city she attacked, and they killed everybody. And the last wave of Romans and British that were sympathetic and in cahoots with the Romans held up in that temple for 2 days. And then Boudica gave the order to set it on fire. And they killed everybody. After that, ever since Caradicus was defeated, the Romans had Colchester as their capital. So their capital city was burned to the ground, and then she decided to march on London, which at the time was Londinium. Also, Colchester at the time was called Camulodunum. I'll go ahead and spell that. It's Camulodunum. Camulodunum. Anyway, she marched. She's marching her army on London, which at the time had a population of about 20,000 people. 20,000 Britons, Romans, and Romanized Britons alike living there. And Suetonius at this time was in Wales, killing all of those druids I was talking about earlier on the Isle of Anglesey. And he got word that Colchester was in flames, and there was an army of rebels marching on London. So he got on his horse with a advanced attachment of cavalry and rode in 2 days, apparently 180 miles, and then the rest of the 250-mile distance he got there in another 2 days. So he got there in 4 days, and when he arrived, he saw the situation, and London and Colchester had no defenses. They had no walls. The Romans didn't think that these allied vassal kings were gonna mess with them. So when he got there, he realized the city was lost. All he could do was regroup, and he had to surrender the city. So Suetonius moves out, and at the time in Rome, there were 4 legions. There was one in basically around Somerset County. There was one in Lincoln, and there was one. There were 2 in that were with him in Wales. The one from Somerset, for some reason, didn't respond to the order to rendezvous in the middle of the country around St. Albans. The one from Lincoln did, and the ones from Wales were already on their way. Anyway, and when they met somewhere north of St. Albans on the you call it Waddling Street. I think now you call it the M5, but that was one of the old Roman roads that they built. And anyway, Boudicca sacked and destroyed St. Albans because they were one of those towns that got along with and sympathized with the Romans. And we have an account from Tacitus that, I forgot to say, there's, when she burns London to the ground, if you go down about 13 feet under the present level of the streets in London, the archaeologists call the layer of ash the Boudicca destruction layer. And I'd love to get a sample of that some way, somehow, one day. But anyway, let's see. Suetonius had about 15 or 12,000 men, and Boudicca at this point had raised an army of somewhere around 180 to 250,000. Suetonius, as Tacitus tells us, selected a area where there was a river, and behind him there were hills, and to the sides of him there were hills, and on top of these hills it was a dense forest. In front of him there was this broad opening plain, and that's where he set up shop, right at the back end of this thing, so they couldn't flank him or attack on the rear. And there's a debate whether or not he used a what they call a wedge formation. Either way, the result still would have been the same, but in rugby there's apparently a move called the flying wedge, where you basically lock arms like a triangle and then ram people, and the combined strength concentrated of 8 guys, you're just going to plow through people. If you have a Roman line with the shields and they come out like this, almost like triangles, like the teeth on a saw, what'll happen when the men rush towards them, because the Britons fought in single combat. You'd have a mass of people on each side of a field, and they'd have some guy come out, call somebody out, and then they'd fight it out, and it would kind of go like that sort of individually, or it would turn into a melee. Well, the Romans had this discipline, big shield, little sword sticking out, and they just hold their position. When the mass of men rushes towards the line, no matter what the shape of the line, the people in the front are crushed from the weight of the people coming in behind them. They can't move their arms, they can't draw their swords, and they just get stabbed, fall down, and the Romans slowly march over top of them. And it's like a riot at a football stadium where you have these accounts of people that just get suffocated from being pushed up against the wall when the heave of the heaving mass goes that way. Well, it's the same thing that happened to Boudicca's army when they met Suetonius at this location. And eventually they retreated, but they also brought their children in wagons and had them around the area just outside of this broad opening valley, essentially where you would escape to. And then they got crushed up against their own wagons, and the Romans eventually just killed everybody. So the account is that there were at least 80,000 killed that day, with something like, 400 Roman deaths. Yeah. Now, we could talk about how it wasn't very wise of Boudica to have done what she did, but if you think about it at the time, she had no idea how the Roman army worked. She'd never seen it in practice. She'd only seen small skirmish and sort of like diplomatic escort army guys. And, she outnumbered them 20-1, and you'd figure eventually they'd just overpower the Romans. But they didn't. They just slowly got mowed down. Which, if you think about it, is really quite a remarkable achievement to achieve without guns. This is swords and pikes, Is there something wrong with the radio?
Oh,
no,
it's fine, I think.
No, I heard a weird sound. But yeah, with hindsight, we could tell that Boudica made a colossal mistake. Suetonius was pretty much screwed, but he knew he wasn't going up against a real army. And Boudica did have an army in the technical sense, but it was an unorganized, undisciplined mass. One of the arguments why there were children there is because the women were also fighting. Anybody who could pick up a weapon, come along. And there's nobody else to watch the kids, so naturally you'd put them in what you would think would be a safe place away from the battlefield. Worst case scenario, you all get killed and lose, your children get taken in as slaves. But that's not what the Romans did, they just killed everybody. She had no way of knowing that. She saw the situation Suetonius was in and figured that 20-1 advantage would be enough. She was wrong. Had she any knowledge of how the Roman army worked, she probably would have waited at the mouth of this valley and perhaps taken, a third of her army, even a quarter of it, detached it and sent it around on either flank to come and circle behind the Romans up on top of that hill there. Then she would have pressed forward with the attack as usual, coordinated with the guys in the back that would have attacked the Romans from behind as they were being attacked in the front. The Romans would have been defenseless against that because of the sheer numbers and they would have lacked the high ground. But she didn't do that. And, of course, it's easy to say this with hindsight. And it's tempting sometimes to compare Boudica to the French Vercingetorix. Vercingetorix was the guy that led the Gallic tribes against Caesar towards the end of Caesar's conquest of Gaul. You have the Battle of Alesia, which is one of the craziest battles in the ancient world. Caesar besieged a mountain and built a wall around it that was like 8 miles long. And then he got attacked from outside of that wall, so he built another wall, like a donut, that was like 11 miles long, and fought off 130,000 guys on the outside and about 80,000 guys on the inside, with 50,000 men that had already been wandering around for 7 years. Anyway, Vercingetorix was a fully experienced and trained, albeit Gallic-style, soldier. He fought with Caesar as an ally for a time, so he knew exactly how the Romans did their thing, what they were capable of. And for a while, he only harassed Caesar. He'd harry the foraging parties and kind of like cutting railroad ties and blowing up bridges with the French resistance sort of thing. If he'd have kept at it, he might have been able to make it just too much of a pain in the ass for the Romans to bother with at least a certain part of Gaul and leave him alone. But for some silly reason, towards the end of the year, Caesar began moving south towards what now is northern Italy, but what at the time was called Gaul, this side of the Alps, Gallia Cisalpina, as opposed to Gallia Transalpina, Gaul, on the other side of the Alps. And Vercingetorix thought he was retreating back to Italy for the winter. Caesar wasn't retreating. He doubled back around as Vercingetorix went back to this fort in Alesia and went up there and did this crazy thing where he built 2 walls in 4 months and killed like 250,000 people. But Vercingetorix's mistake was the same mistake Boudica made. They engaged the Romans in direct combat. You can't win against that. That's why you have terrorism. That's why you have insurgents and espionage and crazy things where, let's poison their water system or blah, blah, blah. It doesn't take an army to do that. It's harder for an army to stop that. So comparing Vercingetorix to Boudica is correct in that they made the same mistake against the Romans, but they went about it in completely different ways. Boudica was just reacting. I'm pissed, large number of people, you see a Roman, kill the fucking Roman. Oh, these Romans are really good at also killing people, and now we're all dead. Crap. She's said to have survived that battle, by the way. Some sources say she lived out a long life. That's what Dio says, and some sources say that she committed suicide. That's what Tacitus says, or maybe it's the other way around. But suffice it to say, I can't believe she didn't just commit suicide after she lost that battle. But Vercingetorix was brought in chains to Rome, and if you believe the sources, publicly garroted in one of Caesar's triumphal marches. Well, it's actually just called a triumph, but it is a thing where they march, all the booty and, spoils from the province. And when Caesar was in Gaul, he let me think what it is. He killed 1 million people over the course of 7 or 8 years. That was equal, we estimate, to 1/4 of the population of Gaul. Gaul had 4 million people. Caesar killed 1 of them. So he killed 1/4 of their population and destroyed or burned, I think, 50% of their villages. And then a lot of other villages were destroyed because Vercingetorix actually was one of the first generals to do what they call a scorched earth policy. He was burning his own people's villages to deny the Romans access to food to feed Caesar's army. I call that SAD, strategic access or strategic area denial. Basically, if I can't have it, nobody can have it, kind of thing. So, there wasn't another attempt by Britons after Boudica in 60 AD to do anything until way later on. I don't know when. I'd say it's probably at least the 300s, or late 300s, early 400s. And that's separate from dealings with Scotland, because the Romans did continue to press northward in the late 100s and into the 200s and into the 300s, and it was towards the late 200s into the 300s when it started getting bad, and they had to build a wall, and then they had to fall back, and then they had to build another wall, and then eventually they gave Britannia up altogether. And then they had to give, France fell to the the Vandals and the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths as they were marching through. Spain fell because those same people kept moving south. The Huns were coming in from the steppes of Russia and basically like Kiev, Ukraine area. The empire had already split by the mid-300s, so you had the Eastern Roman Empire having to deal with these Huns, and they buy them off so that then the Huns go and deal and screw up with the Western Empire, because then at least the Eastern Empire has their stuff taken care of. And the Western Empire falls in the mid-400s, and you have the Byzantine or Eastern Empire that continues until, believe it or not, about 1450-something. Yeah. And the other weird connection from that is the people that invaded Constantinople, the people that invaded, Constantinople, they were the Turks. They made it Istanbul. Well, the Turks, you know what war they were involved in? They were involved in World War I on the side of the Axis. Sure, you may or may not be aware of that, but I always thought that was kind of a funny little connection. There's only 3 empires between, like a war our great-grandparents participated in and Rome, the first one.
I didn't know that at all, Miles. I knew that. One thing you mentioned about the scorched earth. I can't remember what you said now. You called it
strategic access denial.
Strategic access denial. Well,
yes, which the acronym is SAD.
Yeah. Didn't Russia also employ it against Germany?
I think they did a little bit, but Russia's also Russia. They don't need to scorch anything. They just need to retreat north, wait for December to come, and then by June, you come back south and you sweep up the dead Germans. Russia's uninvadable because, the one country that the Genghis Khan's group wasn't able to take over was Russia. And what did it was the winter. Moscow fell. The Russians technically lost. They just went north, waited, came back in the spring, and sure enough, the few Mongolians that had not died were hightailing it out of there.
So weather.
Mm-hmm.
The weather and
the terrain. Like Wales is very hard for an army to come in and put down an insurrection. Scotland, same thing. Afghanistan, we see this today.
Strategic knowledge of your own land. That's why earlier in the show when you mentioned about Anglesey.
And does anybody remember the movie Princess Bride? Where they have that guy where he's saying, well, that's the second oldest trick in the book. The oldest one, of course, less well known, is never get involved in a land war in Asia. Sorry, I think that's fucking hilarious.
It made my wife stay when she married an Englishman because of that film.
Oh, really?
That's what she said, yeah.
Well, it's a great movie. I haven't seen it in a long time, though. Well, I've run out of notes, but,
Miles,
yeah.
You were going on about the Brigantians and stuff. Now, I'm in my head, from what you say, it seems incorrect and stuff. Like, the Brigantians, did they move north? What sort of size of area did they have? Do you know that?
Yeah, it was basically what's now Lincolnshire, the south part of Yorkshire, and then if you sort of swing around through Leicestershire and over to, this map has abbreviations, and I don't know what they stand for. Let me find a different map.
Right, that's
center, the Midlands, I think you call it.
That's the answer I wanted. Brilliant. Thank you, Miles. I can track it down now. Brilliant.
Yeah. I'm only just now becoming acquainted with England. Because before, the only stuff I was ever familiar with was Somerset, because there's a lot of old Stone Age archaeology in Somerset County.
I've got a particular interest in the Celtic artwork and stuff, and the Pictic artwork, which is more angular. I spent a few years looking at it and made my own mythology, or looked at the mythology and what it was behind it, which seems very earth-based and stuff.
Right.
Very, very similar to like the Native American no ownership of land, stuff like that. I'm just fascinated with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just get a tie-in with this Bridget thing. It's just something that comes into the head that...
Well, I know there's a cross of St. Bridget that I saw at my sister's house because she married an Irishman, so of course he's Catholic. And they have this cross of St. Bridget, and I look at it, and I see, ever since I started thinking about it, you see swastikas hidden in a lot of places that people don't realize they're there. And it amuses me because it's such a simple symbol. Of course, it's accidentally replicated. But anyway, I was looking at this little wooden cross of, they said it was the cross of St. Bridget. And I was like, yeah, that's basically a swastika. But yeah, it just sort of amuses me. I have a effigy of the Hindu goddess Lakshmi, and it has a swastika on the four corners of it.
Yeah, the ones I've got them with from Indian tapestries, but they've got 3 points, not 4.
I've only ever seen one with 4, but sometimes they have dots. They have 4
reversed.
dots in them.
Yeah, they're reversed.
Some are reversed, some are not. Most of the ones that I see are actually the same way the Nazis did it. The Nazis just put it at that angle on their flag.
Yeah.
Because the whole... discuss the Aryan invasion hypothesis with somebody from India, and you'll have a bit of a understanding, I think, of some of the undertones that history entails.
Yeah,
there is
I like
a lot of bullshit.
The three-legged one I like. It was explained to me as it was a 2D pictorial picture of a cube. It's a box.
Could be.
Mm.
But
this turn into the Catholic, also the Trinities. So yeah, it's what appears to be one thing actually is revealed to be something completely different.
Yeah. Well, of course, in the West you have 4 elements, and in Asia you have 5. I can't remember what the 5 are right now, but they're not earth, air, fire, and wind the way we have in the West.
But did you say Chinese? Then metal's one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like you have earth, metal, water, something, metal. Yeah, I don't remember right now.
Fire as well.
Oh, okay, fire. Wow. Actually, you know what? Wait, let me just look that up, because that's worth telling people. How much time do we have, and is there anything going on after this if you wanted to continue yapping?
It's your radio, Miles.
Okay, it's wood, fire, earth, metal, water.
Wood. That was the one we missed out, wasn't it?
Yeah, wood. Which makes sense, because if you're going to have fire, it implies a fuel,
Well,
wood burns. Yeah.
Where does earth come in? Because they actually have earth, don't they, as well? Within the symbol.
Yeah, the thing they don't have is wind.
I bet they do have wind, but what is it? Sparky in the room mentioned Metatron's Q, which made me think of like the platonic solids. There's the 5 of those, and sort of like the platonic solid for Earth would be a cube, wouldn't it?
The Chinese symbol of it looks like a sapling growing out of the ground to me. But I know it's not a pictograph. Can you guys give me about 3 minutes, and if you want, we could do like another 15, 20 minutes of like questions and Jones on top of mud.
Right. During the intermission, I asked Miles a question about the Brigantians. It's the only way I can say it, what area they were. And he mentioned Lancashire. Now, I was born in Lancashire, which is, it fits into my story even more. And Miles asked which town I was born in, Ashton-under-Lyne, and it says, what does the name Ashton-under-Lyne mean? And I hand it over to Bob.
Right. Right, well, there was a few. The one I heard first, or one of them I was told, was that it pertained to a burial site. And the ley pertains to a ley line. Now, there's lots of different explanations of ley lines. The Victorian Ley Hunter's Guide puts them all in a dead straight line, and you can see through their architecture they do actually connect up the old sites, and in a sense where the people gathered were intersections. Now, in the area myself and Robo live, this is really obvious. All around Manchester, the number of towns ending in the letters L-E-Y, Ley or Lie, there's loads, Burnley, Alderley, and Ashton-under-Lyne or Ashton-under-Ley, as it would have been. So yeah, there's quite a few. It has got quite a lot of historical value, the area. But the idea of it being a burial ground, coming the word ash, isn't really substantiated. However, the fact that I don't know if they were Druids, Miles, and I don't want to give the wrong, but some form of burials were actually carried out on the Moss area, around the Moss area.
I'm pretty sure the Druids didn't burn their dead, but I am under the impression that the Iceni did burn the dead.
Right.
So I'm confused. I don't know if maybe the Druids were perfect. Maybe they did.
I don't think they were Druids.
Cremational cremation. I'm not sure.
No, they have found. Like I say, there is no, to my knowledge, there is no evidence to say that it was where they were burning people. It would stand. But there has been some evidence that they were the more, like you could say, the conventional Druid type burial. These were drowned. They were being struck in the back of the head and drowned. That's what I remember. So that was an area of Ashton, if my memory serves me right, known as West End or West. Is it West Park? They built an estate on it over the area.
Well, just to get back to the burial thing, if you read an old archaeology book, inhumation is when you bury a body in the ground. Humation is when you burn it. So if you have, sometimes you'll see cultures define whether or not they are humational or inhumational in their funerary practices.
The major landowner in the Victorian era was called Hugh Mason.
What was it?
Hugh Mason.
Hugh Mason?
Yeah.
I don't know. That can come from a lot of things.
Yeah, but that was his name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
His first name?
Yeah, it was Hugh Mason. H-U-G-H.
I once came across a name that was Eugene Darwin that I thought was kind of weird, just because it made me think of eugenics.
It's a really odd area of a really strange area with loads of. But like I say, I wasn't aware of anything up to the earliest buildings. I don't think they're just pre-Tudor. I think
But the stuff you said you live on an estate. What is that?
In the area where Jim lives, Dorkenfield. Normans were there, which was now called Duckingfield. Their name would have been Ravensfield. Dork, I think it was. Dork was the Roman word for raven. So, the Romans were all over the area. We have Roman forts and areas. And some are pertained to be Roman and not, Miles.
But as far as the people and ethnically speaking, I would still argue you're more German than you are Italian. Now, you culturally had the influence from the Romans, but after about 450, you have the invasion of the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, and then 300 years after that, you have the Vikings invading from the north, and then 30 years after that, you have the Normans that come in for about 200 years, and then after that, once the Normans are all expelled, the next thing you know is you've gone from speaking a Gaelic, Celtic language, and now you're speaking a German language with French Latin mixed into it, and that's what we now call Middle English. That's what Le Morte d'Arthur is written in. That's what Canterbury Tales from Chaucer are written in the 14th century.
I'm going to learn to speak crisp.
Well, my pseudonym surname is English. Comes from it's my matrilineal surname. It's my mother's father's name, and he comes from landed southern gentry that owned human beings as property.
Yeah, my original surname, my father's real surname is Holyland.
Is what?
Holy Land. Holy Land. He was Franklin Harry.
That's a delightfully English, pretentious-sounding name.
Yes, man of Kent. Or he could have been a Kentish man. I could never get it right. Scorn.
But maybe he married a Kentish woman, but he was a blah blah.
He married a Lancashire lass.
Aye.
Married a Lancashire woman.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
I wonder what lass goes back to. I've always wondered about that. It might plausibly go back to Old English. I'm not sure, or it could be a borrowing from Welsh or something. I don't know.
No, the only one I know is car, from its extension from the north.
Oh, I know. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the vowel shift. When you had the writings of Chaucer, he was at the very end. You've got Old English, which is a branch of German, and another interesting thing about Old English is the first European language to be written down by itself. It's the oldest one we have evidence for. It's older than written German, it's older than written French, it's older than written Italian, Spanish, Romanian, Russian, all of them. With the possible exception of runes and Nordic. But anyways, they borrowed the Latin alphabet, they added a few characters to it, and that's how Old English is written. Old English reads, if you know German, learning Old English is not that difficult. It's kind of like Spanish and Portuguese. Excuse me. They're very similar. They're still different. You still have to study it, but it's not that hard. Anyway, you have Old English that, as far as we know, came into being around about maybe 700, 750, probably 800 AD. The earliest written accounts of it are from about 900-ish, 930, 880, around plus or minus 50 years of 900 AD. And you've got Old English all the way up until about pretty much the First Crusade, right around 1200. And then you have the Normans. And, the Normans come over, 1150 something? And after that, you have the French Latin influence coming in and mixing with that original Old English German. And that's what produces Middle English. Middle English runs from about 1250 to 1400-ish. The thing is, Chaucer was writing in the late 12, early 1300s, or mid 1300s, something like that. That's where the Canterbury Tales come from. Le Morte d'Arthur, that's around that era as well. They spoke vowels the way the Romans, the way the Greeks, the way everybody else in the whole of Europe pronounced vowels. E was A was ah, and if you go ah, A, you're going up in the mouth again. So you have this shift where ah becomes A becomes E becomes I. And this happened over a course of about 200 years. And if you think about it, Pirate English in the 1400s is kind of like the midway point in between, where they'd say matey instead of mate. Well, the word before was mate. So you go from mate, now is A, mate. Well, there's still the other syllable, so matey. All right, matey. And then, after they stopped saying "ar, matey," they started saying mate. That
you got to watch how you say mate and matey. It can mean completely different things. If you say it not quite right, there could be a bit of conflict.
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to talk about all right, I could use the word name. It's the same difference. Name in 1300 would have been name. It's spelled the same. N-A-M-E. Name. The E is that schwa. It's that indistinguishable vowel sound. It's name. So you go name, name, or namey. Well, they drop the E because that's a bitch and language likes taking shortcuts. And that's why you have a silent E, and that's why name is spelled N-A-M-E. We've retained the spelling over pretty much 1,000 years of language change. It should be spelled, I guess, N-A-M, and then every single A you ever see would be pronounced A, but then that wouldn't work either because we have this gang rape, bitch slap mess of a fucking spelling system. But anyway, apologize, that wasn't a very polite way of saying that, but that's what they call the Great English Vowel Shift, and that is what makes English so weird with its spelling and weird with its pronunciation, and why you get people in the 1940s that would prefer to pronounce Italy Italia or Italia or something like that, or the Italians instead of Italians or Italians. It's because you're coming from this vowel system, and if you're not familiar with like Spanish, for example, that's why you guys say taco and enchilada and burrito. Burrito to me sounds like something you'd say if you had a stroke or if you learned English last week, but that's the way it is over there because you're pronouncing it the way you do after the vowel shift, whereas, of course, it's a Spanish word. It's pronounced burrito, but, that's just another example, and it creates all of this confusion, so I think they should teach the the Great English Vowel Shift to children.
I totally agree. Does it happen again with old and new? Wow.
What?
The vowels, as it goes up. Does it work all the way up through the A, I, O, U?
There's certain ones where it starts getting really complicated. Like, you have I, and that you start getting towards the top of the mouth, and then they start turning into diphthongs. Like, we don't say O the same way that Europeans say the word O. Vosto pointed this out to me. We actually say O-U. O. Mm. You know what I'm saying? Every time you say O, you end it with oo. You're saying two vowels at the same time. You're not just saying O. And in order to say O, the way, like, say, Vosto, you kind of have to sound like Boris from Rocky and Bullwinkle. You kind of have to like pretend like you're having like a European accent. The English accent doesn't, or English both in America and Canada and Australia and New Zealand and all that. We're all pronouncing these vowels in this same style, and for some weird reason, because language is a fluid thing, and most people didn't write down stuff back then, even though you had writing. I mean, that was like 10%, 15% of the population. So most of the people speaking the language aren't reading a whole lot. The vowels changed over the course of about 200 years, from about 1350 to 1550. They just changed. So by the time you get Shakespeare would have said name. But Shakespeare pronouncing it name, he would have been aware that that is new. He's educated, and that's how we're saying it now in posh-ass London where I live. But up in the countryside, over in Lincoln, or whatever, or Ashby upon Lyme, or whatever, you'd probably have people that were still saying, name. Some of them, you might have had the grandfather saying, what's your name? And then the kid would be like, you mean name it, Grandpa? Don't you want to talk right? There was this change in the language that went on, and it's just weird.
Yeah, I wonder how quick those changes take place.
Well, apparently it took 200 years.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of local dialects.
Yeah.
And they've been kicking around for, like I say, all my life, I remember.
Well, King Albert was the first king of England, correct?
Oh.
Really, historically or whatever. I've heard this from the language thing, because the first king of England was from the south of England, and his version of speaking Old English became the standard for most Old English that you... Like, if you read a book, you research Old English, you're getting that southern form of it. But there's, like, 30 other forms of Anglo-Saxon that you could also study. And you get differences like to and fro, or twa and fra.
It would have been the King's English then, rather than...
That's when that term started.
Yeah.
It was with him.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if they were kings, but rulers. He was the first ruler, wasn't he?
Well, if you do hereditary, it's a king.
Right.
Which is another thing that British culture has retained that the Romans were never able to instill. The Romans were always against hereditary rule. Even during the emperors, most of there's what they call the Julio-Claudian dynasty, but after that, with a few exceptions, you don't really have hereditary rule. It's just sort of like whoever the hell manages to crawl their way to the top of the power structure and becomes in charge as the emperor. It doesn't have anything to do with, oh, my daddy was boss, I'm going to become boss when I grow up. No, you're probably going to get stabbed when you're like 9. That's what's going to happen to you.
Poisoned, yeah.
Or you're going to get sent over to, like, Bithynia or something like that. Some province in the asshole of nowhere.
Mm. Good stuff, Miles. Good stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm always funky. I just don't. The idea of hereditary rule freaks me out. It's like, because all you're doing is like, you might have like King Arthur, the perfect king. Not that guy ever existed, but let's just assume he did. It's fun to pretend. And he's perfect king, totally just, everything's great, except for Lancelot. But anyway, rules everything perfectly. He's got a son. That son grows up doing the fucking 9th century equivalent of sitting around playing video games all day. And then when dad dies, he gets all this inheritance, and he's in charge of all these people, and some Vikings start invading, and he's like, hear Crete is really nice this time of year. See ya! You know, you're not going to get necessarily a good ruler just because it's a genetic dynasty.
Yeah, I totally agree. We've had a few crazy people. Some people that actually say we still have got crazy people, but we've had actually.
And then you have the inbreeding. Yeah, of course.
Which always helps.
I'd really be curious to see like the proportion of what's the prince that just got married to what's her face? What's his name?
I'm as about up to date on it as you. Prince, what's his name?
Prince what's his name that just got married to what's her face. I'd be really curious to see the proportion between his hands and his feet. I'd be real curious to see. I bet he's got like a giant glove and like tiny shoes, or the reverse of that, or some shit.
Well,
you know?
If you believe,
maybe he's got like 4 fingers, like on The Simpsons. You know,
if you believe Chunky Mark, the taxi driver poet,
wasn't his grandmother like his aunt or something? I mean,
well, they've got hooves. He actually says they've got hooves, so you would be right with the tiny feet analogy. But then
I don't think he's crossed with a goat. I'm just trying to say he's inbred.
Oh no! I think Mark's saying he's actually crossed with a goat. I don't think he.
I'll give him more credit than that.
Yeah, well,
he can walk upright and has opposable thumbs.
And if you listen to David Icke, of course, they've also got web.
Oh, yeah, he's a lizard. Yeah, he's a shape-shifting therianthropic transdimensional.
So in all fairness, that's only his inheritance, as you say, and I truly don't think he should be judged or anybody from his peers. You know, it's like because it could go the other way. You can actually end up with somebody who's really kind of.
Yeah, but I have a really hard time taking David Icke seriously.
I have a pretty hard time taking anything seriously nowadays, Miles.
Yeah, but particularly David Icke. I mean,
I find it only actually suits
transdimensional lizard beings. Really? By the way, therianthrope is the word for when you have like part human, part animal. Like that's the technical word. It's called a therianthrope. But
the only thing, Miles, that taking things seriously seems to serve now is to get me agitated and annoyed, and I just kind of don't see the point in it any longer. So yeah,
that's what narcotics are for, my friend.
David Icke, I get a lot what he's saying. I suppose
David Icke has probably done more for the liquor industry and the medicinal pot business than he has for anything else. Because after you hear that shit, you're just like, man, I need a fucking drink or a smoke.
If I look at the Grey family, Miles, the dead hand of the elite that still exist in our local area.
That also implies that rich people can get along with other rich people, and I have a problem accepting that.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I looked at that from David Icke's point of view, I'd probably see a demonic, emotionless.
That trend I would agree with.
You see, I think it's just in how the portrayal. When David jumps to alien beings from another planet, then I'm gone. I'm out of his ballpark.
Not to sound like a smartass, but you said alien beings from another planet, and most nose at right angle to face college graduates would say, that's
extraterrestrial.
Where else would aliens be from? But no, that isn't the case. Yeah. I said therianthropic transdimensional beings. That's right. You could have aliens from the planet Earth, my friend. They're just in a parallel universe.
Oh yeah, I could.
So your differentiation is not redundant in that sense, based on what we're discussing.
Yeah, I wouldn't dispute that. I could go for that. Like I said, but to me, it's more like they're actually picking up the mindset of these people. And then doing their best to interpret it from the information the consciousness has got. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that they come up with the lizard people of Ashton because they are very reptilian in the way they think. You know,
by that you mean base. You know. They're very base in their thinking. They're only, like that scene in, what was it, Waterboy with Adam Sandler. It's like, you're umdigla oblongata. Yeah.
So I suppose if you get into that total focus of mindset of you're 100% right and that's got to be the way it is, then for David, he'd see the Queen and then he'd see a reptilian and then he'd see the Queen and then it'd be a reptilian. So I suppose
I assume with, you're familiar with the term Occam's razor.
No.
That concept, the simplest idea, the simplest explanation is usually the correct one.
Yes.
I think David Icke's insane. He's friendly insane. I don't think he's going to, eat your children or anything, but
it's not the definition of insanity to repeatedly repeat the same action and expect a different outcome.
Yeah, well, there's that. That could also be defined as stubbornness, I suppose.
Well, I mean, if we go on that parameter that, repeating the same thing and expecting a different outcome is insane, then yeah, I'd have to agree.
All right, well, let me say this on that note. There's a difference, because if you have somebody that's campaigning for the right for women to vote in the 20s, and they keep saying the same thing, and it takes a long time for, they keep getting the same thing back, but they keep at it, and eventually they produce change. That's not insanity. But if you stick your hand on a hot stove and burn your hand, and then your hand is burning, so you want to make it feel better, so you put it back on the hot fucking stove, and you keep repeating that process, that would be insanity.
Of course, yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I mean, keep implementing the same political structures we have over and over again and expecting a different outcome. As far as I'm concerned, you might as well put your hand on the stove.
Right.
It's insanity. So, I don't have an issue with David being insane, recovering from my own insanity, Miles, I have been...
Yeah, but if you're already recovering from insanity, why subject yourself to any more? It'll just sully the whole matter.
Oh, yeah, I don't... No, I wouldn't... I'm not actually sullying it at all. It's just I could actually get how he would come up with his explanation.
Alright, so you're being empathetic.
Yeah, empathetic. There you go. I've learnt another word.
Hey, you guys know the show Peep Show with David Mitchell and something Webb?
No, I don't.
Oh, David Mitchell's one of my favorite comedians. He's like my generation's version of John Cleese.
Right.
I make that argument. The great John Cleese. If you don't like John Cleese, fuck you. John Cleese kicks ass. Great comedian. I think I'd say he's my favorite British comedian, actually.
John Cleese?
Yeah, John Cleese, Monty Python.
Yeah, all I know is John Cleese. Yeah.
The funny walk.
Yeah, I mean...
You started the war! No, you didn't! You invaded Poland! Anyway.
Yeah, I remember the sketch from...
Fawlty Towers.
No, from... it was... I can't remember.
The thing I was thinking of is from Fawlty Towers.
Might have been the David Frost show. And one of the Monty Python crew was arguing with a vicar or of some description, somebody from the church, when they'd just done Life of Brian, and they were saying it was a slant on the church, and he was arguing that the church had obviously taken the name of their Messiah of comedy into vain by naming him Jesus Christ, obviously taking the initials of John Cleese.